Okay, Raimy, welcome back. Good to see you again. Another episode that we're going to do today. Today, we're going to talk about trends for 2025. We're going to look deep into the future. We're going to be prognosticators, prophets, whatever. I don't know what other term you use for that. Gurus, experts, knowledgeable people, someone who knows something. We're going to go there after we do our good of the week, our win of the week. And I'll give you the floor to start there.
Okay, so thank you for that introduction, setting us up. By the way, I don't know. I feel like in thinking about my list for forecasting what 2025 looks like, a lot of it is based on what happened in 2024. So I don't know if that makes me a prophet or more of a just looking at the rear view instead of forward. But I'm trying to see what 2024 set the stage for in 2025.
Don't prejudge your list and say and give me like you're like framing where I'm going to have to go on my comments potentially on your ideas. Allow it to self-judge for its positives and negatives, and it's good and it's bad. I'll let the audience also do that too, and don't put it in a box. That's before you get to your good or your bad. When I taught high school, it was a long time, and not to put you in that space of like a high school kid, but when I taught high school, a lot of times I would go to a new class, a new room, a new group of kids, whatever it was. A lot of kids would self-define and prejudge themselves a certain way to set the tone for like how I would see them as their teacher. So a kid would say, "Oh, I'm not that bright," or I don't really ask good questions. I always say, what? Allow what you're about to say to be the thing that judges you for being brilliant or not brilliant, and allow me to form my own opinions. Don't put yourself in that box on your own. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to me to do that. And so here's the same thing for you.
Thank you. I'm just happy you're not making me write that on the chalkboard 100 times. Stay after class and say, "I will not self-judge. I will not self-judge."
Okay.
A smart board. Fine, fair enough. So my good of the week, I'm going to do one. This is not cheating. Well, I'll let you judge whether this is cheating or not. I won't self-judge. I'm going to give someone anonymously a win. I spoke to a leader of an organization, an executive director, last week. She works in the mental health space and works for an organization that specifically helps women that are going through mental health struggles. And I don't want to use her name because or say the name of the organization, because one of the things that she said that just really struck me was that as the executive director of this organization, fundraising is clearly a key part of her job. And we were talking about fundraising. And she went on this little rant to me about how she does not like it, does not enjoy it, does not want it to be part of her job. She is in it. She is in the job. She actually is the founder of the organization as well, because she believes in the cause. She herself had gone through some mental health struggles and needed such an organization, which is why she created it. And she sees fundraising as being a piece of it and has sort of dedicated herself to being excellent at it to the extent that she can be, because she wants as much money for her organization to help as many women as possible. And it was really, it's something that we know that not everyone who's a fundraiser is a born fundraiser and does it. And I've certainly spoken to many people who have it as part of their job description, even though they wish it weren't part of their job description. But this was the first conversation I had in a while where someone put it so starkly, and I just had earned a tremendous amount of respect for her. And it was really awesome. And thinking about even the audience for this podcast, I think a lot of times I think about it in terms of people who are born fundraisers, and we want to speak to them and we want them to like go out and be the best fundraisers that they can be. And it was an important reminder for me that audience also includes people that aren't natural fundraisers, that don't enjoy it and may not be particularly good at it, which is why they need the best practices out there, which is why they need to understand what works, what doesn't, so they can get better at it, because they want to improve, even if it's that's not like what gets them out of bed in the morning. It was just the conversation played. It stuck with me. I've been thinking a lot about it since we had it, and I want to give this anonymous woman her props.
Yeah, kudos. I think that's a really good one. Let me just share on that for a second. How many fundraisers do we know who actually live it and love it and breathe it and smile and they're happy about it? Like, I think it's maybe a handful of people who really, even if they're naturally good at it, really love it. Like, I can think of one guy off the top who who I will always call the happy fundraiser. Other guys, I think, are naturally, men and women are inclined towards it because they're schmoozy, or they love relationships and talking to people, or they're deeply passionate about the cause. And other people are just good at it. And it's not because of any of those other reasons. Like, they learned how to be good at it, or because they had an initial, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, towards it, and they saw an opportunity there, they become passionate as a result of the work. Like, it's not passion first, it's work first and then passion later. And I mean, we should do a whole series on the darker side, let's say, or the underside of the fundraising world, and the people who don't love it but do it anyway, and how that hurts them or helps them or whatever that is. But I think there's a lot of people in that boat. Certainly a lot of people who founded organizations who fundraising was the last thing that they were thinking about when they decided that this needed to be solved. And it was like, oh, this needs to be solved. How are we paying for it? Right. And then you have to go ask people for money. And you're like, I didn't sign up. I didn't sign up for this. So I totally hear that. If that person needs a good coach, I'm always available. But separate from that, I am definitely down with understanding where that person is coming from. And I can appreciate why you put them in the category of anonymous. But I do think that's a really worthy set of conversations with a group of leaders, probably anonymously, who can talk freely about their experience in it and what they went through because of it. So totally hear that.
Yeah, but the other thing that I think is interesting on the point of founders and executive directors not necessarily bringing that skill set to the job when they enter it. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've noticed in the field is, even if you look at higher education, you're seeing more degrees out there in the field of nonprofit management. And one of the reasons why I think that is because I think there was a large generation of people that became founders because they were essentially activists for various things, right? And this, I'm thinking like in the 60s and 70s, when people were really like taking things into their own hands and starting organizations and doing things that they believed in. And there wasn't a professionalization of the nonprofit field. I think it took 15, 20, 25 years after that wave of people who started organizations as activists to come, not that they unified together, but the field came together and said, no, we need to professionalize this and learn from the business world. And just like there's MBAs out there to teach people how to balance the books when you run a for-profit corporation, there should be an equivalent that people can step into these roles and yes, have that fire as an activist, but also come with the education piece of it in terms of running an organization. Running an organization is no different than running a corporation in terms of what skills you need. And the more professional and the more, just strategic and smart, the way you run an organization, the better off the organization is going to be. I think the next area for the field to sort of climb in that regard is fundraising, because from what I've seen, fundraising isn't exactly a piece of those curricula. I could be wrong about that. That's not something I've looked into deeply, but I think it's more about the finances, management, interdisciplinary teamwork, things like that, and less about the day-to-day fundraising elements. But I think it would be really interesting for the field to professionalize around that. I know there's lots of courses out there and lots of amazing coaches as well to be able to help people take those steps. But I think it's an area to watch as well as we're thinking about trends for 2025.
I will add that just, again, my fundraising experience personally started when I was the rabbi of a synagogue. Like it didn't start because I wanted to be in fundraising. I wanted to be a rabbi. And being the rabbi, in my mind, was speaking, teaching, running great programs, helping people grow spiritually, and being there. And at some point you realize, well, you want to get paid, one, but also you want to do things and you got to pay for those things. And so suddenly fundraiser was a role that you're playing that you didn't get into it for. And now it's like, I don't know how to fundraise. Like, what does it even mean? I didn't know what, so it's sort of, you do it backwards because you sort of fall into it and then you're swimming against the tide of it. But the truth is, those are the people ultimately who are the best. The best fundraisers I know are the least formally trained.
Interesting.
I hate to say it that way, and yes, they'll benefit from some of the training, along the way on skills and maybe technology, whatever. But their pure instinct, like I always used to say, there was a rabbi that I know in New York. who you should always check your pockets after you left the room. I used to joke about it because he will take your wallet on the way out, but he was not a trained fundraiser. He never even went to school. Like he knew how to talk to people. He understood the emotions of it. And he had a really passionate cause. And I would say on some level, he did his homework about the people, but he did that instinctively, which was, I wouldn't say shocking, but was amazing to watch him operate. And he couldn't teach that. It's not teachable. It just was whatever. But, so I think you're right. And I think that's a piece of the puzzle here is at one of the major problems is that you can't offload the passion to the fundraiser, right? And the fundraiser needs, with all the skills and all the tech and all the preparation, if you come into an ask like blah, 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 you're not going to succeed. So you have to come with some of that too. And it's hard to fake. So there's an authenticity piece there that's really important. And so it's really hard to do when you're not the person who's in it. So this person who's a founder who maybe hates the fundraising aspect of it is still passionate about the work and is still the name attached to the organization. And so she brings a certain gravitas when she walks into the room and has a job to do. And she goes and she does it, even if she begrudgingly, hates the moments and hates the meetings. And you always hear the stories. I know this about certain people too. They always hope that the person they're meeting with isn't home. See, because then they don't have to have the meeting, right? And they can just say, "Oh, I showed up and you weren't there." So I get it. I think to me, it's a worthy roundtable panel conversation to have in an open, honest conversation with leaders of organizations, new and old, to really talk through the burn, the pain on some level of what that is and how you get to the other side of that, if you can, or how you sort of live with it and be okay with it. So shout out to your anonymous leader. It's a great one. You can always come back to anonymous because anonymous is the greatest gift to nonprofits in the world. And so we'll come back to anonymous on the other side of that. I'm going to go in a very different route here. I was at an event the other day for an organization I do work with, and they were doing their annual staff meeting. And let's see if I can bring this up. My screen froze. Here we go. They had a person who spoke. I want to share her picture here. And her name is Moran Stelianai. Moran Stelianai is a former hostage in Gaza. She spent, I think, 50 plus days in Gaza. She was at the Nova Festival on October 7th. And she spoke at this event. And it was extraordinary. She spoke for, I think, an hour. There wasn't a sound in the room while she spoke other than tears, I would say. And in light of just what's gone on the last few days in terms of an agreement and the potential of hostages coming home in the next few days, it was just sort of top of mind for everyone. But there was something in not just her story, but the manner in which she spoke, the tenor in which she spoke, the tenderness with which she spoke about an incredibly difficult and painful and horrible experience, and the frame that she gave to it, and the ability in her story to always somehow find how she was being saved in each of these moments, as horrible as they were, and how she was being rescued, even if she was going through something even worse than before, and how this was a miracle, and that was a miracle, and another thing was a miracle, and all these other things. And I mean, it was just, with a little bit of humor mixed in. It's like I've been around some of these other situations in the last year in terms of children serving, friends of, children of friends serving, unfortunately going to houses of mourning, going to funerals. I think this was the first time I was in the presence of a hostage, and it was unbelievable as an experience, and unfortunate that it has to be a thing. But the grace and the power of this person was just, it was mesmerizing and very uplifting. Unfortunately, for, again, the context of it, but really just amazing. So I wanted to share her here in this context because that for me was just wow.
Speechless. I'm speechless. I have not heard, I've seen videos, I've heard speeches of some of the hostages and certainly their parents, but I haven't been in the presence of any, and that is a remarkably moving experience. Wow.
Yeah, it was, yeah. It's, the story behind the story that she told that led to the story, almost like just sort of the the sense that she sort of provided that it was, let's say, inevitable that she was going to be there that day, but that this was her journey, that she was going to be at that festival on that day. And she was there as a vendor. She wasn't there as a participant. She was there as a vendor and selling her, like, it's like, been like, the story was just crazy. Her story's crazy. And I'm glad she's able to tell it, obviously that she got out and she's able to tell it. So I wanted to share her with our audience, Maryles and I, and then, praying, hoping about what's going to happen over the next number of days and weeks in terms of the new group of hostages that are being released. So yeah, I'm not sure I'm ready for it. I'm not sure anybody's ready for that emotionally, however those things go, but it is something that's about to happen.
Wild.
Okay,
wild.
now from that, I don't know how we shift into our topic of the week.
Fundraising.
The only way I do that is appreciating, honestly, that there is always an ebb and a flow. There's always that yin and the yang. There's always the good and the bad. And in our faith community, at the same time that we're celebrating, a lot of the time we're also mourning. And a lot of the time when we're mourning, we're also celebrating. And we're somehow able to balance those two things at the same time. I don't know how we do it, but we do it. Okay, our topic of the week is trends for 2025. It's still January of 2025. People have maybe done their planning. And what I thought we would jump into is some things that we're thinking about that either we do believe will be trends in the coming year, or things that we want to be trends maybe in the coming year. You can take those however you want. And we'll go for a while here. Each will share some ideas, some thoughts, and we'll talk some of those through, ask some good questions. Raimy, Rubin, the floor is yours for the first trend of 2025.
Sure. So we in preparing for this, I was doing a lot of thinking and really tried to get my list down. I came up with either 3 or 4, depending on how you parse the list, because there's definitely some overlap in some of these. But I think the first one that jumps off the page is going to be the rise of AI in fundraising, the continued rise of AI in fundraising.
I don't know how clapping comes through on the podcast, but if I could add an emoji to the screen, I would. Absolutely has to be number 1 on the list. Okay, tell me why.
Well, so first of all, and this goes back to looking at the rear view as you're looking forward as well. It's happening, right? So there's lots of opinions about this, whether it's good, bad, the other. The bottom line is that it's happening. So I think at this point, if you just look at the adoption rates, I saw one, it was very, not skewed, but it was a very specific sample of people. I saw one stat that when it came out, I think it was about 18 months ago at this point, they did a survey of fundraising professionals about a month later, and it was something like around 9-10% of fundraising professionals had used it, had toyed with it. They've been doing, this group that I was looking at was doing polls every couple months, check it, and just recently, the last poll that they did, which was about a month or 2 ago, the number was up into the 70s. So that, you're looking over the course of 18 months, you're looking at, that's not total adoption, that people are reliant on it, but you're looking at it went from being single digits essentially, or very, very low double digits, to nearly 3/4 of people using AI in certain capacities. So this thing is happening. And I think the reason why it has to be number 1 is because the applications of it are so far reaching, and they're far reaching for people all over the map. Whether you don't think it should be used for personal communication, you can still use it for other avenues, or whether you're just starting out with the very basics with ChatGPT, then there's a tremendous amount of utility there. And if you're a more advanced user, the number of software the softwares that are coming out from it, and the specialization that some of these tools are able to focus on, you can drill down. I saw one tool, the name of it is escaping me. I meant to write it down, but it was just focused on grant writing. Mm-hmm. And grant writing is not something that I've paid a tremendous amount of attention to in my particular field. I've done a little bit of it in the past. It did not really speak to me, but clearly there was a need, the amount of frustration that grant writers have around deadlines and word count and getting everything in. And these tools now are just make it so much easier and make it so you have the ability to work smarter and not harder. So the reason why it has to be number 1 is because no matter where you are on the spectrum of love it or hate it, or novice user or advanced user, there's just a tremendous application for it. And I think I could go on and on about other examples of applications for it. If people are sitting there saying, okay, I know this thing exists, but how is it actually going to affect me on the day to day? But I can come up for air for a second. I know you'll have a lot to say about this topic. So let me throw it back to you, and then we can go deeper on the utilization.
Well, no question. No, look, I think there's a company here called V, which one of their core offerings is an AI grant writer. I don't know the success rate, but it's like it's he's called Grant. That's the name of the character, obviously. But that is, they identified something in the field, and like I think grant writers look at it and think, oh, if this helps me at all, like absolutely, there's no question. And I would go even further: is it's going to be part of every tool you use, regardless of whether you want it to be or not, and it's going to become default in the next couple of years in a lot of these basic tools that you use. The fact that it's not yet is more surprising to me than anything else. So if you're going to start writing out, welcome journeys in your email marketing software, it's going to be embedded in there as an AI, which, it's going to ask you the 6 questions you need to answer, and it's going to create a welcome journey for that community of supporters. If it's data analysis, so you'll see Copilot is now available inside of Excel or the equal version in Google Sheets, where you're now able to analyze the sheet in the document itself, and you don't need to write those crazy cockamamie formulas that you had to write for years. And now you can just simply write equals AI, tell me X and Y and Z. It's going to be ubiquitous, and it's going to be part of everything. And I would say the opposite which is if you're not going to adopt or adapt to it, you are done. Like, it's as simple as that. On this, yes, you could still go to people and ask them for money, but you're not going to be as smart as you were before. You're not going to be nearly as successful as you could be. And everyone around you is going to be asking the question is like, hey man, why aren't you using these tools or benefiting from these things that it offers you? You'll be so much smarter around it. And so I've gotten some flack about some of the GPTs that I've created, especially around emails and thanking people and all that other stuff. But at the same time, I have used the tools that I have created in that space, all free, but I've used them and I've shared them with people, and they work. So they're creating materials that are not in place of me, but on some level far better than me, because they're taking the full knowledge of the full world of fundraising and nonprofit leadership, and then they're squeezing that into that email that I'm writing or whatever it is. So there's no question that is number one. And that number that you shared, though, is super interesting to me, because I don't even know what that means, that they have used it. Is that like a one-time thing? They opened up a ChatGPT account, or, they interacted with a bot on a website somewhere? Like, what does that mean?
But I'd have to look at what the exact question is, but the bottom line is that whatever the question was, it was the same question 18 months ago as it was 2 months ago, and that adoption went from 10 to 75.
Yeah, so I'll give you even a better example from my own. So I teach a class on fundraising using digital tools, online tools. It's like an area of focus. Last year, I added AI to the end of that presentation. The first time I did it with the AI, nobody knew what I was talking about. I felt like I was talking over the entire course of people. It just didn't resonate. And I wouldn't say that's simply because I wasn't good at teaching it. I just feel like it just wasn't something that they were doing. The second time I taught it, everyone in the room basically decided we needed a separate conversation on that subject. And so I did another separate module on AI specifically, and only on ChatGPT, not even touching any of the other ones, Perplexity or these other ones in terms of the deeper Claude or whatever they are, just in ChatGPT, not even getting to custom GPTs, just how to write the prompts. And now when I'm about to teach this course again in 3 weeks, just this one, so people are reaching out and saying, really make sure that the AI component is a significant component, and less about the regular digital and, online campaigns, and talk more in the space of that. And the truth is, if you're an up and coming, starting out as a fundraiser, if you can get ahead on all these tools, you're going to crush it in the field.
Yeah. The other place that I have found it to be really helpful, besides for the writing, or in addition to the writing, is just to actually be a thought partner, as weird as that sounds, where if you're just to help you think through something, if you
Not
are
weird.
going to a major donor and you don't really know what your talking points should be, tell ChatGPT, or through using whatever you know about the major donor, and just say, I'm about to go to this meeting. I'm struggling a little bit for talking points. Can you give me some suggestions? Just start from there and literally interact with it as you would a pen pal or some sort of colleague, and talk it out with ChatGPT. And I think even if you don't ever show that written piece of a finished product, those talking points to anyone, or it's never going to be published anywhere, like there's just a tremendous amount of value that comes from it. And it's a crazy resource.
Agreed.
We're going to talk about the times before there was ChatGPT, before there were times there were AI to help us with this stuff.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I just to give you the context. So the first time I started using I hate using that term, using it, because it sounds like so dirty and like drug oriented. But to come up with there has to be other terminology for it. Okay, anyway, but it's like me on the soapbox, now me off the soapbox and continuing. And when I was still at Cosmatch, I was working on a campaign with someone, and they wanted to name their campaign. They wanted an out-of-the-box name for their campaign, and I had no idea where to go with it. This is, I want to say, maybe 2 years ago, almost, a little less than 2 years ago. So before really people were even touching this stuff, I think to the degree by which you described. And I was like, okay, let me try this. And I threw it into ChatGPT. I'm like running a 24-hour campaign for a school somewhere out in the Midwest. They don't want the typical kinds of names. Play the role of a nonprofit marketing expert guru, blah, blah, blah. Give me 10 names, right? So it gave me 10 names. And then from the 10, I picked the 3 and I said, okay, based on the 3, give me 10 more based on the 3. And then I whittled it down to 5, and I sent off 5 names. And they picked one and they left it. It was like Campaign-a-Palooza. It ended up being something ridiculous like that. But they loved that it was like, schoolish and cartoonish and kiddish, whatever. Never told them where the name came from. Like, oh, this is amazing. And I thought, like, well, I could never have come up with that on my own. But having set the parameters and the prompt and weeded through it and edited down and funneled and all that other stuff, I was able to get to a place where I was like, immediately, I was like, oh, this is going to be fun, right? This is going to, for me, like, this is going to be really fun. So, and having worked now in building custom GPTs and looking for ways to monetize on some of them and to really make them worthwhile, like, this is where it's going. And so I talk about the idea, and we mentioned it here, the $1-person $1 million nonprofit, because all the tools will be available and the person can run it on their own without anybody else. Yes, it'll cost what it'll cost, but they'll be able to run it on their own without a team, because they'll have used all of the AI tools and then relatedly automations and integrations that go with it. And they'll be able to do just an amazing amount of work that they can't do now, and the efficiency level that they'll go up. I think part of what goes to what you talked about before, maybe, or relatedly, the burnout piece for leaders is sometimes the, inane tasks and work that they have to do, which just pull them down at the end of the day. And they just want to be running around saving the world and having massive impact and doing good things for people. And then when they have to sit down at the database and write things down in the CRM and have to, so I think AI, we could talk about this, and we will, because we're going to bring people on and we'll talk to them, talk about them. We're going to work inside the tools. I even prepared for this conversation in ChatGPT today. So totally, absolutely 100% with you. That is by far number one. Okay. I'm going to go with one here right now. I've talked about it a little bit the other day in a previous episode. We talked about this, the idea of the re-rise of in-person experiences. And I think that is already, I think, a trend. And so it's me looking a little bit back to 2024, but me looking into 2025 is, and this relies on a lot of other factors, but I think curating incredible experiences for your donors and your supporters in 2025 will be a game changer and a separator for organization. Now, how you do that and the way you do that and how you think about those things and how you come up with them is part of the work, but I think conceptually, I think it's worth an organization going back, looking at their in-person events that they do and figuring out how to X up those events. So X, 5X, 10X that event experience, because that will pay itself back in spades, I think, in the year and the year next year ahead, 2 years ahead, because I think as more of this stuff becomes fake, the deep fakes, the AI tools, the inability to tell whether or not you're actually talking to a person or some sort of a thing, that will crave the in-person concert experience. They'll embrace the in-person stand-up comic and the ability to work hand in hand with people physically in spaces. I think is going to be really, really a separator for organizations.
That's a great one. It was not on my list, but it's a great one. And one of the reasons why I like it is because I think that it's a zag when everyone else is zigging to a certain extent, or at least the world was going in one direction and the pendulum has sort of swung, and now it seems as though we're heading back in that other direction. So over the last 5 years, really since the pandemic, the world has gone virtual, work has changed, in-person gatherings have changed, people have become much more reliant, accustomed to Zoom meetings and doing things online. And I think the reason why it's not intuitive to me that what you're saying is right is because this is like, I know, a sensitive subject for a lot of things, but I think about like remote work versus in-person work. No employee, for the most part, is going to say that they prefer in-person work to remote work, right? Remote work affords people that flexibility. There's not a commute. There's a million reasons why, but that doesn't really speak to productivity. And I'm not by no means advocating for going back to in-person work full time or anything like that. But I just can tell you, as a remote employee, I miss it, right? Like I miss going into the office. I do once a week, but I'd like to go in as much as I can because I miss that in-person stuff. And I think that we're starting to see that pendulum swinging back to say, no, there is value to, we're doing our gala dinner, we're doing our gala event, whatever it was, online for all these last couple of years. And even though if we took a survey of people and they said, no, we don't want to get out of bed and have to put on real clothes and go in person to an organization to celebrate with them, we would rather do that on Zoom. I think that for the organizations that can sort of sniff out that there's going to be higher productivity in building relationships by getting them to put on pants and walk out the door and go to the event, I think we're going to see that makes total sense to me.
Yeah, you're going to have to work harder, I think, to get people to do that, because as I said to you last time, it's easier for a person to just say, nah, I'm not coming. So you're going to have to figure out how to make those experiences, those events better or more engaging or just more interesting and more of an experience than you might have done in the past. So that and I would take it even separate from the gala events for the team itself, right? So your team days, when you want to do a team building exercise day, whatever that's going to be, just getting together for bagels in the office, it doesn't fly. Like you need to, and it's going to cost, but I think it pays itself back. And I think there's a lot of value in it. And I'll give you, I've been thinking about this as a business idea, is creating the space for one-day company gatherings. So it's almost like an event space, but it's for corporate teams to get together in that space. So it's an off-site location. It's beautiful. It has a lot of the amenities, and it makes for the ability to create great team experiences on the off-site, so that even if you do it once a month in that space, right, it's really worthwhile. And if you use that space for your organizational events, same thing. Now, obviously, again, it's a business idea, it's a thought, it's something that's intriguing to me in my head as a concept. But in this space, particularly what I'm talking about here, and I really think this is true, there's the rare thing, right, that I'm going to go to in person. And it's going to be the thing that if the only way it's going to be better is if I'm there in person. So it's the people around me, it's the food, it's the ambiance, it's the room, it's the talent, it's the subject matter, right? Here it's an example. So just one from the other day. So I heard this woman speak. Hearing her speak on Zoom would have been one thing. Being in the room with her when she spoke about this harrowing, horrifying experience as a hostage, you can't trade that. You can't do that differently. And I'm not saying to do that with that kind of situation, but generally speaking, like you want to be in the room with these people, and being on Zoom with them is but being in the room with them is like a whole other level experience. And I think that's where that's where I'm looking at this for the in-person piece of this.
It's great. It's great trends. I think the sort of the final point that I would make on it is that unlike with AI, you mentioned there's a risk or a cost involved with trying this, right? With the AI stuff. Okay, spend an hour or two trying to write something with AI. If you don't like it, if you feel like you could have done a better job without the tool altogether, okay, you spent an hour, whatever, that's it. There's a greater risk in terms of the cost of putting on an in-person event than it is hosting it virtually. So I think organizations might be a little bit reluctant to do that if they have the option of doing something virtually that's significantly cheaper. But I think the more forward-thinking organizations will definitely understand what you just said, whether you can't compare the two events. If you're doing something or bringing in a keynote speaker, hearing that person speak on Zoom is just a totally different experience than hearing that person in person.
Sorry about that. Yeah. And I'll just finish it off because we're going to go on to the next one is as it relates to that, don't do the hybrid. Don't. It's an exclusive in-person event. Don't offer the Zoom link live stream thing because it bifurcates your ability to focus on the work and make the great experience an experience. And it waters down ultimately what you're actually accomplishing. And on some level, force people to make the move to come to your event in person and be there physically. So hybrid, I think, is not the way to go. Choose one or the other and stick to that one or the other. But the in-person, I think, is one. Okay, next one, Raimy, you're up. Go.
Okay, so this was second on my list was the amount of money that is going to change hands over the next decade or two between baby boomers and younger generations and to organizations. Again, I was doing some research on this, and I knew that the baby boomer generation was an affluent generation by and large. I did not realize how affluent as a generation they are relative to the generation above them, which is the silent generation, I believe. And there was a number of factors for this. The size of the generation, the sheer number of people, there was literally a baby boom where all of these people were born in that era. We were looking at more two working people households than in the previous generation. Just the economics over those years where they were professionals were significantly greater than they were in the prior generation. So between all of these factors, the size, the level of education that these people had was greater than the previous generation. The number that I saw that there's literally going to be $84 trillion passed between baby boomers to younger generations and to organizations over the next 20 some years. And I think that the prediction, the forecasting for 2025 is that forward-thinking smart organizations are going to take a huge step forward in preparing for that wealth transfer. I can go on about this. This is something I put a lot of thought into because I think you can prepare for it in a couple of different ways. And this is why I wasn't sure if my list had maybe 2 points, 3 points, or 4 points, because it all sort of comes together here. But I think there's ways to prepare for it by speaking to the baby boomer generation themselves as they transfer that wealth and making sure that organizations have a piece of that. And there are ways to do that just for not to take away any money from their children, but to take away money from the taxes that they're going to end up paying. So there's a whole sort of legal element of the vehicles that we can offer the baby boomer generation to donate to organizations. And I think that we can prepare for it on the millennial side and start to be better about responding to the way that millennials donate, be more responsive to them and the trends that we're seeing specifically by them. And so we can sort of prepare for it both by thinking about the baby boomer generation themselves and those that are going to inherit a lot of this wealth. This is not to say that the wealth is going to necessarily be transferred in 2025, but I think that organizations are going to start taking a huge step forward in preparing for this and knowing that it's coming in the coming years.
It's an interesting one. What's that? I feel like there's a danger side to this too, which is missing it, right? And being unprepared for it, or the idea that it's important but not urgent. I'm not sure if I'm articulating what I'm trying to say about like what you're sharing as a trend. It's not, well, I'll say this, it's not obvious, right? It doesn't feel like an obvious sort of trend is someone who's thinking about the big dollars and the big opportunities and the big transfer that you're talking about over the next number of years and being prepared for it, maybe because they don't necessarily see the bang for it the first year, or convincing their board that this is something that they should put some time into, because in the long term, it's going to be something that's going to be really beneficial to them. Explaining how they're going to spend time in those relationships now for the sake of the long-term benefit to the work. Like, you hear what I'm saying in terms of the difficulty of that? I mean, I get it. It's a huge thing. I thought you were going to go in a different direction and think more in the space of like donor advised funds, but
well, you hit the nail on the head there a little bit, because one of the things that I was going to say is that I really don't like throwing out big ideas to nonprofit leaders and saying, go and do this thing. I'll take a monthly giving program. Go and start a monthly giving program, right? Because like it's something that feels like it should be so easy, but no, it takes time and resources and energy to develop a really good monthly giving program if you're going to see results. You can't just like throw a donate button that says donate monthly and expect monthly donations to come in. So I'm reluctant to say, oh, go prepare for the baby boomer generation great wealth transfer. Like, go ahead, like, go do that, without breaking it down into pieces and explaining what that means. But I do think that simply making sure that your organization has the actual vehicles to collect donations from these people and the ways that they're giving is a huge step forward. And you mentioned donor advised funds, which is just one of the several ways that I've been thinking about how donors are giving nowadays. And by the way, donor advised funds are happening on both levels. They're happening. The baby boomer generation has predominantly not, I don't know what the numbers are, but they've set up donor advised funds. This is something that there's more and more of them being created now, but we're seeing more and more millennials, younger generation, setting up donor advised funds now as well. I think at one point they were thought of something that only the real wealthy strata of donors set up, but now we're seeing donor advised funds popping up on an individual level, even if you're only, I'm going to use the word only, even though it's a terrible word in this case. Even if you're only giving a couple $1,000s over the course of the year, you're still seeing people use donor advised funds. The other vehicles that you can make sure that your organization is ready to accept money through would be just stocks. We're seeing a lot of, like, just in general, non-cash gifts to organizations. So make sure that your organization can take stock transfers. And for the baby boomer generation, the other thing that's just being utilized a lot right now are QCDs, which are essentially gifts to organizations that can be taken out from people's IRA retirement funds pre-tax. And we're seeing a lot of organizations utilize that simply as a way, because if the money doesn't go to an organization, then the money is going to go to the government, and people would rather see their money go to causes that they really believe in. So between those vehicles, between the vehicles of things like DAFs and stocks and QCDs, and I'll throw in even also as well cryptocurrency from on the millennial side, we're seeing a lot of non-cash gifts being donated to organizations. And that's one of the things that I think organizations can do. And then all they have to do is make sure that when they go, especially to major donor meetings or even in a mass appeal, to make sure that there's a line in there that talks about all of the assets that different donors can donate. It doesn't just have to be cash. And the interesting part about that is we've also seen that when that line is added, that you can give all through all of these different vehicles, that even the cash donations go up. Just reminding people of their sort of net worth when you mention all of the different vehicles that they can give through brings back donations up from a cash level. So that's why I can continue to talk about this for a long time. The great wealth transfer between the baby boomer generation and millennials and the younger generation as well is going to be just a huge trend for nonprofits as we move forward.
Yeah, so I would say by bringing up those other things, those other vehicles, donor advised funds and other things, you're actually adding to the trends list. So you count those as trends without actually talking about them as trends in the list. But if you wanted to go almost like a 3A, 3B, 3C kind of a thing, donor advised funds or similar would be additional trends to watch for in 2025, because they're going to come and in a much greater, they're already coming. They're in a much greater way, in a much easier way in terms of use, like the ability to use them and organizations to benefit from all those different things in the short term and the long term. And relatedly, I would add that they're evolving in the sense that from a technological standpoint, they're evolving. It's no longer just a person who has millions and millions of dollars in the donor advised fund space, but it's a person who has a much smaller amount of money and is also able to use some version of a vehicle like that to benefit their charitable giving during the course of the coming year. And that I think will continue to be there. The idea of almost having like fundraising wallet that's, we're able to sort of see all the monies that you put out there, moving monies into spaces and then moving them from there. So you're on your side managing the money in a way better than you might have done it before, and appreciating how much you have available to you and putting those out. That kind of concept doesn't fully exist yet, because I don't think people necessarily realize that they want it or need it. But I think that is the evolution of where that goes. The person knows how much they have in their donor advised fund. Some of the companies now have that little click button, right? A person can donate straight out of their donor advised fund, which I think is a really good innovation. And obviously the numbers around that, we could probably have Mitch Stein to come on and talk about that concept. And I think that would only bolster the point that you're making and push organizations sooner to get ahead of the trend in those things than later.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, then last trend of the day is for me going to be related to the one that I said before, the one that you said before about AI, but also related to the one that I said before about in-person, is I think hyper-personalization on outreach and communications to donors and supporters of an organization. What I mean by that is the ability to get tight and close to the people that support you is easier now than ever. Leave out the space of them in person, but the ability to know as much as possible about a donor, the ability to connect at a greater level, the ability to connect at different levels with those donors, and to connect them at a very personal level is greater than it has ever been before, I think. And I think that that's a trend that I think donors are going to want, and I think organizations are going to need to do. And I mean here, as an example, is if you have target segments in your supporters list, the ability to segment those groups out and message to them directly as they are and who they are, you're going to have to do that. And it's not going to be okay to send out the generic message. It's not going to be okay to send it out to dear friends as opposed to dear Raimy in that way, or to not include a first sentence about you in a way that feels more down to the authentic level of who you are as a supporter of this organization. And the generic stuff is going to have to go away. And that's work. That's a lot of work to do. But the way I look at it is, if I'm a donor at an organization and I'm a supporter of the work that they do, and they don't know who I am, I'm out. Because I can expect that at this point. If, the clothing companies or the social media companies know everything about me through their algorithms, on some level, I want the organizations that I support with my hard-earned dollars month over month, year over year, to have that same level. And if they don't, I may be going in a different direction. I'll give you an example. I got an email the other day from an organization that I'm loosely connected to for many, many years. It was asking me about hiring summer interns for my company. I'm a one-person business. It happened for a year and a half. The email that they have for me is for when I worked at a different company, and that company may or may not have had interns in the summers. And so I was their point person. To me, I'm on the list, but they don't know anything about me. Clearly, they're not doing their homework. And that message was just totally missed. And I thought, well, you didn't try, so I'm not going to try. Right. And so I'm going to be difficult on some level because I'm a bit of a snob about these things. But in the space of what I'm looking at is that organization gets you right, says, hey, Bini, I know you're a one person, company, but maybe you and Cramerica Industries are going to need a summer intern from NYU, like in this show. And, I know it sounds outlandish and crazy, but it doesn't cost you anything to have this person come hang out with you, work with you, travel with you, schlep around with you, whatever that is. Like, that means they did their homework. They're paying attention. They're up to speed on it. They know me as a donor. They know me as a contact. They know me as somebody who's related to the organization. And that for me is a separator.
I really like that one because for a specific reason that it rounds out the AI forecast in the sense that the biggest knock on the AI is that we're going to lose that authenticity. We're going to lose that personalization because these generic messages that are not being written by a human are being sent to someone to convey a lot of emotion. And I think if we start to think about okay, but that email that we're going to write is going to take me 9 minutes as opposed to 2.5 hours to write. So where can I dedicate that time to strengthen my relationships? Acknowledging that I am losing a bit of that authenticity when I outsource my emotional writing to AI, where can I get that back to forge deeper relationships? So we're not taking our eye off the prize of personalization or of human connection. In fact, we're keeping it on the prize. We're staying focused on how are we going to deepen relationships with our donors. And we're just going to do that by making sure that all of these other things that we never really had time for or never really had level of depth to drill down and segment our donors in this specific way, we're going to be able to reach them. And I think so that coupling is really, really nice. And I hope sort of, just calms the fears of people that think that we're going to lose all of this realness to what we're doing here once we introduce ChatGPT into our workflows. We're not going to lose it. We're going to gain it tenfold in other areas.
Yeah, you have to think about it. Like, I'll give you an example from my own work. So it's an organization that I do work with, and one of the things that I do is certain level of donors that give. So I am the first response, right? So besides the automatic response from the system, I write that first thank you email, let's say. So as you know, I built a custom GPT for amazing epic. It's called epic thank you notes, right? And what I do is when I feed my data into that, again, naturally I don't think a particularly good writer, and I'm a massive procrastinator. So having the GPT makes life easier because it starts it off for me. But it asks me certain questions about the donor. Now, because I know it's going to ask me these questions about donor, I can go do a little bit of research about the donor. I can find them on LinkedIn. I can find where they live, in rural Massachusetts or whatever that is. I can figure out their affiliations through a Google search about who they are based on some data points. Now, when I'm writing that email to them, that email is 100 times better because it's not generic. It's not system generated. It has real details about who they are as a human being. And they read anything like, wow, like, wow, and that is I think a game changer for the nature of how you're starting a relationship. And in many cases, those people are unsolicited donors. So they gave freely of their own volition, not being asked. And so you have to come back with something that is eye-popping. You can try to call them. They may not answer the phone. But when you're responding in this way, that's like next level kind of a thing. And so pushing yourself to that, and because it's so quote unquote easy, right, to use the tool, you have more time to think about it, more time to be creative about it. And yeah, potentially you're not fried. And so you can go make the phone call and make the meeting and feel good about it because you did good work here, and you can actually develop and cultivate those relationships. And when you can appreciate the person for who they are and where they are, like we talked about before, they're going to be a much better supporter of the things that you do and the work that you do, and for much longer, because you recognized it early, you took care of it. And it used to be that it would require me to get in the room with somebody to figure out the personalized touch that you would have. And that's hard because you're already in the meeting, right? So you'd have to find, they're a baseball fan, or they like art, or, certain music collection. And then you're whirring through how to figure out how that gets into the conversation. But the ability to use the technology and the tools around you to hyper-personalize the experience, and it's going to get even more. So I think into the future, for better and for worse, I'll give you an example of the bad side of it in just a second. And I think that's a key piece of trend for 2020. The bad part of it is if you AI-ify all of it and the video is fake and it's simply just lips moving and it says the person's name, so that's not good. Now that's doable. It's totally doable. And I have done it as just a tool, as to show it to somebody as a leader, the ability to send 100 thank you videos as opposed to, one authentic one. It's 100 of them where you can change your shirt 100 times and change the names of the people 100 times and the amount that they gave 1,000 times. This is what I was talking about with your son and his thank you notes, right? These thank you videos, those are all fake. They're all AI, and they're not actually you said it once and it's just simply changing. So that's not good. That's the negative side of it. but the ability to really create it and actually do it, because a lot of this other stuff is out of your head and out of your time, and like you can really zoom in on it. I think hyper-personalization on this can be huge. I want to see it become huge. And I think it will be. And I think the organizations that don't do it for sure are going to lose out.
Amazing. So what do we got here? We did AI. We did in-person events.
In-person.
Great wealth transfer. Vehicles to give. So that's either 3A or 4, depending on 3B or 4, with donor advised funds and stocks and QCDs. And the last one we did was just the hyper-personalization and segmentation that we're going to be able to do. It's a pretty good list for 2025.
It's a pretty good list. There are things there are more things that are on my list, and there are things that I hope come off my list. I mean, trends I hope not to see, let's say. That's a different conversation. And yeah, I'm curious to see how this goes. I'm curious to see what other people have to say and what they think about the trends for 2025. I saw a couple of lists out there, and it's definitely a worthy conversation. I think it's super interesting to see how you think about these things, and how other people think about this stuff, and what they're paying attention to in the market. And I'm really, really interested to see how all these things play.
That's what I was going to say. We'll have to pin this episode, come back to it in 11 months from now, and see how we did.
We'll have a watch party. We'll rewatch it with popcorn and say, wow, Bini was super off on that one.
I was going to say, we'll make a drinking game of cringe moments. All right. By the end of it, we'll be on the floor.
I can't believe he said that. Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we will leave this episode there. And as always, I end it. Thank you, Raimy. Good to be with you as always here. Anyone out there who's listening, thank you for being part of our audience. We appreciate your comments. We appreciate your sharing. We appreciate your jumping in and joining us in these conversations, recommendations on topics, on connections, on context, and people to talk to and subjects to talk about. And conversation rolls on. Bye.